In this video, we're going to focus on the legislative branch of the government. So remember, our Constitution was designed to have three branches of government. There's the executive and the legislative and the judicial. Those three branches of government control the country, right? But also remember, where do they actually get their power? From us, because we are the ones that put them into power. And if they don't rule over us in the right way, then we can shut them down and start over. Because we've done that before, right? Remember the American Revolution. So our government is designed with these three branches. And today our focus is going to be on the legislative branch. And we're going to see what their main task is, what they have the power to do, and also some of the ways that they check on the other branches to make sure they don't abuse their powers, right? So we've seen this infographic before. These are the three different branches of government and all of their parts. But again, our focus today is going to be narrowing in on the legislative branch. And as we can see, the legislative branch has one main job, and that is to make laws. That is what they do. The legislative branch makes laws. So whenever you hear like presidential candidates say, when I'm president, I'm going to make this happen, they're lying to you. The president can't make new laws. That is not a power that the president has. What he does do is he can sign the laws that the legislative branch comes up with. So the president can work with Congress, right? He can work with the legislative branch in order to make new laws, but the president themselves isn't the one that can do it. It's Congress. It's the legislative branch. And so the legislative branch is made up of what we call Congress. And Congress has two different houses. There are 100 senators and 435 representatives. So the legislative branch is by far the biggest branch of the government because there's a total of 535 people. There's a total of 535 Congress people that make up our Senate and our House of Representatives. So let's take a look at what they are made up of, okay? So their main task is, like I said, to make laws. We've got the House of Representatives on one side of the Capitol building and the Senate on the other side of the building. And for all intents and purposes, they both do the same thing, right? The same thing happens in both sides of the House. Now, there are subtle differences that some things the Senate does and some things the House of Representatives does, but their main job is to make laws. That is what they do. Some other things they can do, they can impeach and put government officials on trial. And to impeach someone simply means to accuse them of a crime. There's another process for removing them from office, but they have to be impeached or accused first, and the legislative branch does that. They can also override a president's veto. Now, veto is a fancy way of saying no. Congress can come up with a law, and the president can say no. Instead of signing it, he puts his big fat veto, no, and he says, I don't want that to be a law. Well, Congress can override a president's veto. In other words, they can say yes to a president's no, or maybe they're saying no to his no. Either way, they're disagreeing, right? However, if Congress really wants to make something a law, they need a 2/3 majority vote in order to override a president's veto. And most of the time, that's nearly impossible because most of the time, our Congress is like closer to the 50-50 line between Republicans and Democrats. So if you're ever going to override a president's veto, you're going to need Republicans to vote the way Democrats do, or Democrats to vote the way Republicans do. And that just so rarely happens. So overriding a president's veto only happens if you can get 2/3 of Congress to like agree on something and want something to happen. And that very rarely happens. Most of the time, things pass through Congress with a simple majority, right? Just over 50%. Congress can also approve Supreme Court justices. So it's actually the president's job to choose the Supreme Court justices. And we'll be talking about them a little bit later. But it's Congress's job, or the legislative branch's job, to approve of the person. So the president could say, I want this person to be our next Supreme Court justice. And Congress can say, no, we don't really like her. We don't want to do that. We say no. So the president needs to choose somebody that will be approved by Congress. And so that's a process that they need to go through. That's one of those checks and balances where not one branch gets to run the show, right? And that's a classic example right there, where the Supreme Court has their job, but the president gets to choose who is in the Supreme Court, and then the legislative branch has to approve of that choice. So all three branches have to work together in that instance, right? Congress also declares war. The president cannot send us to war. The president can't wake up one day and say, you know what, let's go fight Canada. That would be fun, and declare war on Canada. Nope. The president does not declare war. Congress does. So if we're going to go to war, it's because the 535 people in Congress debated over that issue and then eventually voted to say, all right, we're going to war against that country, right? So war is declared by Congress. And then once they declare it, then the president is the commander-in-chief of our armed forces. So then the president runs the war, but Congress has to declare it first. And then Congress also approves treaties. So when the president makes a deal with another country or goes to another nation and has a meeting with their leader and says, ooh, let's make a deal, let's have an agreement, let's have a relationship. Then he comes back to Congress and says, are you guys cool with this? I made this arrangement with this other country. Can we do that? And Congress approves those treaties. Congress could also disapprove of them if they want to. Okay, so there's a lot of balance of power going on between the legislative branch and the president, which is the executive branch. So those are the main jobs and duties. I said duty again. Remember when I did that, talking about the Boston Tea Party and stuff? Oh, classic times. So they have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of powers that they share back and forth, right? So here is the House of Representatives, one of the houses of Congress, one side of the Capitol building. There are 435 congressmen or congresswomen, or we could call them congresspeople. And the bigger your state is, the more representatives you have. So when we're talking about the size of a state, remember, we're talking about how many people live there, not how much land it is, right? So there's 435 congressmen and congresswomen. For example, California has 53 because California has a huge population, so they get to send a ton of congresspeople to the House of Representatives, right? Oregon, we have 5. Yay. And then there's states like Wyoming with just 1, right? When you are elected, you are chosen by the people of your state. So if you want to be a congressperson from Oregon, then you need to have the people of Oregon vote for you. And then your term lasts for just 2 years. So that means you're constantly thinking about getting reelected by your people back home. So you can serve an unlimited amount of terms, though. So you can be a congressperson forever, as long as your people in your state keep on voting for you again and again and again. But you're up for reelection every 2 years. But you can do it until you decide you're done, or until the people stop voting for you, right? In order to be a congressperson, you need to be at least 25 years old. You need to be a United States citizen for the past 7 years, And you also need to live in the state that you represent. So those are the qualifications. Notice it doesn't say you need to have a degree in law or politics. You don't have to have a college education. You don't have to have served in the military or anything like that. You just need to be 25 years old, a citizen for at least the last 7 years, and live where you want to represent your people from, right? In the Senate is seen as a little more elite, a little more prestigious than the House of Representatives, because there's only 100 of them. There's only 2 from each state. But that's the difference between the Senate and the House of Representatives. In the House of Representatives, they have proportional representation, right? The bigger the state is, the more representatives they get. But in the Senate, they have equal representation. So no matter how big a state is, every state gets 2 senators exactly. When you're elected, you get to serve for 6 years. Like I said, it's a longer term, more prestigious. And similarly, you can be elected again and again and again and again and again. If your people back home keep on voting for you, you can be a senator for a really long time. In order to qualify, you need to be a little bit older. You need to be 30 years old instead of 25. You need to have been a United States citizen for at least the past 9 years. So you need to have been a citizen for a little bit longer. And then, of course, you also have to live in the state that you represent. Now, notice again, it doesn't say anything about you needed to like work for a law firm or work in Washington, D.C. for a certain amount of time or be involved in this or that. No, if you can get the people to vote for you and you're 35 years old and you've been a citizen for the last 9 years, you can be a senator. So that's a kind of cool thing that we don't have any other qualifications, any other requirements for House of Representatives or Senate, basically other than age and being a citizen and living where you want to represent the people. That's just about it, right? So we've been talking about this idea of checks and balances, and this chart shows us all the different ways that each of the branches of government checks on the others. But this week, or in this video, we're just focusing on the legislative branch, so let's make those others disappear. And so the legislative branch can check on the executive branch in several ways, right? Now remember, the executive branch means the president. So the legislative branch can override a president's veto. They can confirm executive appointments. So when the president chooses a person to do a job, then the legislative branch has to approve it or confirm it. They ratify treaties. In other words, they approve treaties that the president comes up with. They can declare war. And once they declare war, then the president is in charge of the war. They appropriate money. That just means they like determine the budget and decide, you know, how much money the government is going to spend on certain things in certain places. And then they can also impeach and remove the president. But it's important to keep in mind that those are 2 different things. To impeach the president is to accuse the president of a crime. To remove the president would be another step in that process. And that has never happened. We have had 4 impeachments in United States history. Andrew Johnson was impeached, Bill Clinton was impeached, and Donald Trump was impeached twice. But no president has ever been removed from office. We'll be talking more about that process when we're looking at the executive branch in another video, okay? Then there's the ways that the legislative branch can check on the judicial branch or the Supreme Court. And that's because the legislative branch can create other federal courts. They can also impeach and remove judges and justices. So the president isn't the only person who can be impeached, right? There are other political officials who can also be impeached. They can propose amendments to overrule a judicial decision, or in other words, if the Supreme Court makes one decision and the legislative branch doesn't like it, then they can just create a new law that like changes what the Supreme Court decided, right? And then finally, they can approve appointments of federal judges. So in other words, the legislative branch has the last final say on who becomes a judge or justice in our system, right? So there you have it. There are some checks and balances of the legislative branch. All right. In our next videos, we'll be learning a little bit more about the other branches too.